It is officially hot, humid, and generally quite miserable to be out in the garden. So that's why today we are going to be talking about what vegetables, tropical fruit, flowers, and other tips that you need to know for the month of July so you can have a successful Florida garden. And as always, I'm going to be using my 2023 Wild Floridian Garden Planner. And if you would like to help keep yourself on track with a planner, go ahead and pick this up at www.wildfloridian.net/planner. Now let's first talk about what vegetables we can be growing in the month of July. And of course, it's so hot and so humid and if you want to still be vegetable gardening, there is some plants that you can be getting started. Of course, they're all going to be crops that come out of the tropics. Things like roselle and okra, and of course, things like my Puerto Rican black beans, all can be grown throughout the month of July. And one crop that everyone should be considering adding to their garden, whether they want to eat them sweet, or you can actually find some varieties that act like a white potato. And yes, you can grow them through the summer, and for South Florida, you can grow them almost year round. And that's of course going to be sweet potatoes. For my northern people, for my north central people, absolutely get those sweet potatoes in the ground and get yourself a crop. Though you're going to need to watch out that you're starting to run out of time before being able to produce those tubers and the first freeze is coming, because this is a tropical plant that does not want to deal with the cold. But for my South Central and my South Floridians, of course, you can grow sweet potatoes almost the entirety of the year, if not the entirety of the year. I live in Zone 10A and I have grown sweet potatoes 365 days through. And if this seems like a new idea because you recently moved here from the north, hey, you can learn way more about sweet potatoes in this video where I answer tons of questions from your fellow Floridians all about sweet potatoes. Which brings me to one of my first tips. Do not try to grow temperate climate vegetables right now. Only tropical style plants are really going to be the ones that survive the heat, the humidity, and the intensity of the sun of summer. So trying to grow things like carrots and lettuces are only going to bring you to tears. If you have seeds and you've been aching for those crops, just hang on. We're getting close to that season for North Florida, Central Florida, and South Florida where we can go back into those classic crops, but just this isn't the time. Focus on tropical vegetables or tropical vegetable kind of like plants like Thai soldier beans, Puerto Rican black beans that act a lot like northern crops, but they're actually a tropical vegetable. And while that might bring you down that you can't grow some of your classical vegetables for another couple of months, remember you live in the subtropics and tropics of Florida. And especially if you live in the southern parts of Central Florida or you live in South Florida, this is the best time to get tropical fruiting plants going. Of course, I highly recommend bananas. They are so easy to grow. If you have the right climate and the right temperature, so easy. So if you're looking for ideas for tropical fruiting plants that you could grow here in Central Florida or South Florida, of course it can be everything from bananas, papaya, mulberry trees, and citrus. You can also grow things that are tropical in nature but not actually trees, like sugarcane and pineapples. And there's a whole list of tropical fruiting plants, especially if you live in South Florida, and your 9Bs and 10As that hit in Central Florida that will grow phenomenally well. And for my North Floridians, also consider thinking about adding some small trees or other fruiting plants. You can grow things up there like some amount of peaches, figs, pawpaws, and if you're really in the right parts of Florida, you can also grow native pecans. Now this brings me to my next tip on why you want to get tropical fruiting plants growing now. One of the reasons you want to do it now is because it makes your life a lot easier. Also, the plants like this weather. This is like their home. They like this 90-degree heat. They like this 90% humidity. To them, this sun intensity is a fabulous thing. And so, get them in the ground now. And if, like me, when I got my bananas established, you are so busy and might forget on watering them, well, no worries. It's dumping rain and they love that. So get your bananas, get all these tropical fruits in the ground now, and don't really have to worry about watering or doing much fussing for them. Which brings me to my next tip. Where do you get some of these tropical fruiting trees from? Now, while you can go to places like Home Depot and Lowe's, sometimes the varieties work really well and sometimes they don't. My original dwarf Cavendish banana actually did phenomenal, and I got it from one of those stores. I don't remember which. But the varieties are often limited, and going to a specialty local store like me, I use Janae's Tropicals or Jean's Tropicals down here in St. Pete. But for you guys, where do you go to get your tropical trees? Or for my northerners, your fruiting trees? Now we need to talk a little bit about one of the tips I have, which is all around pest management. We are definitely at the time of year that if you have some of those temperate crops from tomatoes to lettuces, anything, if it's survived to this point, it is very stressed out in general. though crops like my eggplants and my peppers are doing phenomenal. But what often happens is this starts to attract in a lot of pests. And I know some of you have been saying that you have a lot of pest activity on your plants, and that is super frustrating. Which brings me to one of my tips, which is it's summer, and with many crops, it's just time to let them go, because this is the equivalent of winter up north. Any crop that is not a subtropical, tropical plant is really gonna struggle at this time of year. Honestly, it's not a battle that I try to fight. I'm all about working with nature and what it wants to do and not trying to force things that really don't want to happen. This could be my manufacturing background. I'm all about efficiency and optimizing the amount of time and effort I put into things. But there is some things you can do to start getting ready for your fall and winter vegetable garden that can put you in a much better place for pest management. And that's all about bringing in plants that attract predatory wasps. Yes, wasps. These wasps generally are going to leave you completely alone, but they can provide an insane amount of benefits. So I'm going to introduce you to a couple of native plants that are actually really great at bringing in predatory wasps, so that you're going to be in a really good spot for your fall crops to have those pests, which there's still going to be a lot in fall, be more under control and not out of control. And the first plant I want to talk about is this one right here. If you're interested in bringing in natural predators into your vegetable garden and your fruit orchards, I highly recommend using goldenrod. Goldenrod is a native plant that goes all over the United States, from Florida all the way up to Canada, into the Midwest, down to Texas. And here in Florida, we actually have multiple varieties, which means that you've got a lot of options on ones that may work for you. Now, this giant plant is seaside goldenrod, and seaside goldenrod gets huge. This plant can get 8 feet tall and is really large, but it can also make a beautiful statement piece. Now, this plant is amazing, and one of the reasons is no matter what type of goldenrod you get, they are all medicinal, but ones like sweet goldenrod that are native to the Central Florida area actually are also edible and can be used as an herb substitute. And regardless of what type of goldenrod you get, they serve 2 major functions, well, maybe 3 major functions for our wildlife. First off, goldenrod is a key part of the monarch migration down to Mexico. These golden yellow blooms are what sweep across the states as those monarchs make their way down from Canada all the way to Mexico. They're also an important and critical piece of our bird migration. Oftentimes, small birds will come and eat their seeds in order to be able to do that long flight down south so that they can stay in the warmth. And when it comes to our predators outside of birds, well, these are phenomenal when it comes to hosting wasps. There are different species of wasps that actually will lay their eggs on these plants. And as soon as their babies are hatching, well, they are very hungry babies. And there's nothing that they like more than eating bugs. So if you have plants that have an infestation on them, put goldenrod nearby, and oftentimes your wasp will come over and clean up the mess for you. Another plant that you may want to consider that is native to Florida is scorpion tail. While you might not be able to see them very well, this thing is covered in dainty little flowers that wasps in particular really enjoy. Now, what's also great about scorpion tail is you will attract a lot of small bee pollinators, which is great if you put these near tomato plants or areas where you have peppers, because those smaller bees are going to work with your small flowers to increase your yields. Now, if attracting wasps to your garden is not on your list of to-dos, you may want to just add some color and flowers with some of these exotic Florida-friendly plants. One that monarchs, I guess cue the monarch. One that a lot of the larger butterflies enjoy is Ixora. You can get Ixora in multiple colors. You can get Ixora in yellows and flamingo pink and fuchsias. It's a really vibrant and pretty color, and often you can actually hedge these in a pretty tight box, which will cause it to flower more and more and more, especially in the heat of the summer. And while the flowers are not very large, these clusters bring in a lot of color, and I really enjoy an Ixora, especially flamingo pink, which I don't have in my yard. I might need to get some. Another exotic tropical that you may want to consider adding to your garden is, of course, hibiscus. I feel like you can't be in the tropics or subtropics without hibiscus flowers. And of course, here in Florida, we can grow so many different amazing colors and types of this Florida-friendly flower. Say that 5 times fast. Florida-friendly flower. But if you've been thinking about going native, we actually have our own native hibiscuses. If you're looking for a native hibiscus to add to your garden, and you actually have some slightly shady spots, scarlet hibiscus is an amazing addition to add to your garden. These flowers, well, they're huge, and they grow, especially in zones like 10A, they can flower through a huge chunk of the year. So just imagine adding this vibrant scarlet color to your garden. Which brings me to one of my next tips, which is you really should be thinking about adding some more native flowers to your garden now. It's so hot. The sun's in my eyes now. When it comes to attracting pollinators, native wildflowers and native perennial flowering bushes are some of the absolute best at bringing in pollinators. This is everything from your bees, your butterflies, and everything in between that likes to pollinate. And the reason you want to think about getting these wildflowers in now is that if you want these blooming in time for your fall vegetable garden season, your winter vegetable garden season, and of course your spring vegetable garden season, the earlier you get them in the ground, the more established and more likely they are to bloom when you're gonna want pollinators all around your vegetable garden. Not sure where to get started on which native wildflower and what might bloom. That's why in the garden planner, I actually have lists of what's in bloom each month. And depending on the shape of your garden, you're not sure, yeah, it's in bloom, but what is it? Even in the front of the garden planner, I have information on which ones are vines, which ones are ground covers, which ones are wildflowers, what colors they are, to help get you narrowed down onto something that might work for your garden and help increase the amount of produce that comes out of your garden. And while I have known for a long time the impact that native wildflowers can have on the garden, I didn't have a really great way to quantify how much that did on produce. But my friend Patrina with Homegrown Florida, well, she was like using the paintbrushes to get her produce to like make fruits and vegetables, which I knew people did that, but I didn't know like you really needed to do that because I've never done that. But now that she got native wildflowers in her garden, she's basically stopped using paintbrushes altogether and has doubled the amount of produce she got. And that was only after planting natives a season ago. So if you're considering getting into native plants, I will link some of these videos on native plants at the end so you can start to get inspired about how native plants might be part of your vegetable and fruit orchard gardens. Now, it can't be a video about July without talking a little bit about the heat, the humidity, and some safety issues that are running during this month. With such high heat and such high humidity and such intense sun and rainstorms starting to roll in, this is one of the more dangerous times of year to be outside in the garden. As someone who worked in a food factory that did not have climate control, I really understand the risks of working so hard and sweating in high heat and humidity. It was always at this time of year that we always went over heat safety tips with our teams, and I just want to make sure that you're doing the right things for yourself. So if you're going to garden, try to garden early in the day or late in the evening so that you minimize your exposure to the high heat of the day. And understand that one of the reasons it's so dangerous here in Florida in the high heat is because of the humidity. Because the humidity stops your body from being able to cool down. The heat that radiates off your body is being held up against it. And even when you're not doing much, like me right now, I'm sitting here and I can just feel the condensation starting to accumulate on my skin, and my body is starting to sweat trying to cool itself down. So if you are going to work outside, make sure you do bring things that are icy drinks, and do make sure that you use something that replaces electrolytes. So whether you want to use coconut water or Gatorade, pick what fits best in your life, but make sure that you're being safe when it comes to that heat and humidity. And another tip that you should be thinking about in the month of July, yes, technically hurricane season started in June, but we are starting to head into the season where hurricanes start to pick up and actually become a threat to us in Florida. We are the #1 state hit by hurricanes, and so while some of them may be mild and some of them may be really bad, start to consider things that you may need to remove or put indoors if a hurricane is heading our way. The more that you have a game plan of what you should and shouldn't move is important to ensure that you can minimize all the stress and anxiety of a hurricane coming our way. And at the end, I will link a video that my father and I did, who was a former emergency services director for the county of Broward / also I think Pinellas County. And in that video, what we do is we go over what you should be thinking about depending on the intensity of that storm. Oh, I'm schmelting out here, melting a little bit. And if you're trying to avoid the heat and want to check out some other videos, go ahead and check out this video on sweet potatoes, this video about hurricane and tropical storm prep, check out this video about starting your first native garden, and go ahead and check out this video about bananas. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye.